In the still hours before dawn, Coventry and Atherton awoke to chaos. Armed officers poured into quiet suburban streets, storming homes that looked ordinary from the outside. But behind those doors, hidden in wardrobes, lofts, and suitcases, lay the makings of an empire. 21 kilos of cocaine. £450,000 in cash. A cache of encrypted phones, and a handgun, modified to fire live rounds. These weren't the signs of a small-time crew. This was corporate-level crime, efficient and terrifyingly organized. And yet, at the heart of it all was a man who never touched the drugs himself. He kept his hands clean, his name quiet, and his presence invisible. 31 years old. Calm. Calculated. A ghost pulling strings from the shadows. His name is Jonathan Mann. But how did someone so quiet, so controlled, become the architect of a nationwide cocaine empire? And before we uncover how police dismantled his empire, ask yourself this: if 21 kilos can move unnoticed through one city, how safe is yours? Don't wait until stories like this hit your own doorstep. Subscribe now. If you won't, step into the comments and tell us why you'd rather stay in the dark. Coventry, in the years leading up to the raids, was a city with two faces. By day, it was industry, markets, and football. But beneath that surface ran a current of desperation. Factories closed. Unemployment crept through working-class estates. Young men watched as opportunity slipped away, replaced by the glow of quick money, the kind only the drug trade seemed to offer. Cocaine was no longer just a party drug for the wealthy. It had become Britain's second most used illegal substance, fueling violence, addiction, and a shadow economy worth billions. In cities like Coventry, it wasn't unusual for entire neighborhoods to feel the reach of that economy. For some, it meant an easy fix. For others, a way out of poverty. And for a select few, it meant power. Jonathan Mann was not the kind of figure people expected to see in the headlines. He wasn't loud. He didn't broadcast his wealth on social media. He didn't flash guns, throw parties, or brag about his moves. He looked respectable, clean-cut, well-dressed, and calm. To a casual observer, he might have seemed like an ordinary young man with steady confidence. To neighbors, perhaps just another face in Coventry's crowd. But that quiet image was part of the disguise. Jonathan wasn't chasing chaos, he was building control. While other dealers fought for territory in the open, Mann stayed invisible. His power was distance. He orchestrated rather than participated. He didn't need to be seen holding drugs or cash, others would do it for him. And in that invisibility lay his strength. Typical gang leaders often live like ticking time bombs, drawing attention with violence, turf wars, and social media bravado. Their empires rise fast and fall just as quickly. Jonathan Mann chose the opposite. His was a system, not a spectacle. Where others ruled with noise, he ruled with silence. And yet, silence only lasts as long as no one is listening. Police in the Midlands were listening. Watching. Waiting. On the surface, Mann's lifestyle hinted at success. Designer clothes. German cars. The confidence of someone untouchable. It was the kind of image that lured others into the trade, young men who thought they were buying into wealth when, in reality, they were buying into chains. Because every car, every hotel stay, and every designer label was financed not by business acumen, but by cocaine. It's easy to imagine him as nothing more than a villain. But there is a cruel irony here. Jonathan's rise was built in a city where legitimate routes to success were crumbling. For a man with discipline and patience, crime promised the rewards that ordinary jobs no longer could. He looked like he had it all, but beneath it was a facade, fragile and dangerous. And the facade would not hold forever. Because while Jonathan Mann built his empire from the shadows, every shadow is cast by light. The question wasn't if police would find it, it was when. And when they did, the silence that had protected him would become the very thing that buried him. Jonathan Mann's entry into crime wasn't sudden, it was calculated. He didn't start with reckless violence or wild displays of power. Instead, he tapped into something far more valuable, the Midlands drug pipeline. A network already moving cocaine from source to city, tested, trusted, and worth millions. Mann's skill wasn't in breaking the door down, it was in quietly walking through it. He understood early that in this business, friendship meant nothing. Loyalty, however, that could make or break an empire. So instead of surrounding himself with childhood companions or flashy hangers-on, Jonathan handpicked men with precision. Each would have a purpose. Each would carry risk so that he didn't have to. Luke and Alexander Purcell. Brothers. Tireless couriers who treated cocaine runs like clockwork. Between April and November 2022, investigators tracked them making more than 160 trips, city to city, hotel to hotel, moving product with mechanical discipline. They weren't just drivers. They were arteries, pumping the lifeblood of the empire through England's roads. Ryan Prescott. Trusted to move staggering quantities on his own. At times, police evidence showed him handling as much as 100 kilos, worth millions at street level. His movements were quieter and more independent, but always under Jonathan's command. Prescott wasn't just moving cocaine, he was moving credibility. The kind of man you needed if you wanted to prove your system could stretch beyond Coventry. Ian Lewis. Not a courier. Not a street dealer. His role was image. He created the illusion of wealth, £60,000 cars bought without legitimate income, signs of success without any legal foundation. To outsiders, he made it look like Jonathan's circle was simply thriving, not hiding. To detectives, he was a red flag waving in plain sight. These men weren't chosen by chance. They were pieces of a machine, engineered for efficiency. One to move, one to display, one to scale, and two to keep the roads running. And while Jonathan Mann kept his distance, never touching the cocaine himself, his fingerprints were all over the structure. Invisible hands, visible results. But invisibility is fragile. Because while Jonathan stayed in the shadows, his men were leaving footprints, on CCTV, in hotel records, and across England's highways. And those footprints were leading detectives closer and closer to the man who thought he couldn't be seen. By mid-2022, Jonathan Mann's network had evolved from a local operation into a national distribution chain. What began in Coventry stretched outward like veins across the country, feeding Bristol, Leicester, Crewe, and beyond. Each journey carried cocaine worth thousands. Each delivery strengthened his reach. The Purcell brothers became the backbone of this system. Detectives later revealed that between April and November alone, they made 160 trips. Hotel stays blurred into one another, sometimes in different cities on the same day. No parties, no wasted hours. Just silent check-ins, quick exchanges, and returns to the road. They weren't living, they were moving. Moving cocaine, moving cash, moving risk away from Jonathan Mann. Ryan Prescott carried his own weight, literally. At times, handling consignments of up to 100 kilos. On his own. The sheer volume was staggering. Street value in the millions. And yet, he remained disciplined, careful enough that for months his movements seemed unremarkable, just another man driving the Midlands roads. But to investigators, every mile was a breadcrumb, every stop a signal. And then there was Ian Lewis. His purpose was illusion. He wasn't shifting kilos, he was shifting perception. Luxury cars, worth £60,000, suddenly appearing with no trace of legitimate income. Designer clothes. Flash without foundation. To Mann's network, Lewis was a smokescreen. To police, he was a beacon. A man who had no reason to live large, except crime. This wasn't chaos. It was corporate crime. Structured, calculated, and frighteningly efficient. Jonathan Mann didn't run a street gang. He ran a business. Every player had a role. Every move was mapped. The roads of England became supply chains, the hotels became warehouses, and encrypted devices became boardrooms. But discipline only works if no one notices. And someone was watching every mile they drove. Police followed them silently for months, tracking movements they thought were invisible. Think about that. If they could watch an empire unravel without a single word, what else is happening unnoticed around you? Don't tell yourself you'll catch the next story later, you won't. Hit subscribe now. Or head into the comments and explain why you'd gamble with missing the truth. By late 2022, Jonathan Mann's network had grown into something far bigger than a local drug crew. This was an empire, millions of pounds in cocaine moved across England, all orchestrated from the shadows. It was no longer about supply runs. It was logistics, structure, and discipline. The kind of system that looked less like crime and more like a corporation. The profits filtered into a lifestyle designed to deceive. Designer clothes. Luxury cars. Nights in hotels. On the surface, it looked like success, like ambition rewarded. But peel it back, and it was an illusion, financed by addiction, by secrecy, by lives unraveled one line at a time. Communication was the lifeblood. Encrypted apps, EncroChat and Sky devices, became their headquarters. Messages written in code, every weight calculated to the gram, every location disguised. These weren't gangsters shouting orders in back alleys. They were operators, treating drug consignments like stock, deadlines, and schedules. To the outside world, they appeared as businessmen. Silent. Clean. Efficient. Ghosts moving through the system without leaving a trace. But ghosts still leave trails. A hotel receipt. A number plate logged on an ANPR camera. A pattern of travel too precise to be chance. Every mile, every message, every purchase, detectives were collecting the threads. And with each thread, the illusion of invisibility began to unravel. They thought the empire was untouchable. But empires collapse, not in flames, but in silence. And the silence around Jonathan Mann's network was already beginning to break. Every empire has cracks, and Jonathan Mann's came not from police raids, but from within his own circle. The most dangerous threat to any operation isn't always a rival gang or a sudden seizure, it's betrayal. And that betrayal came in the form of Thomas Johnson. Johnson wasn't just another customer. He was a bulk buyer, a man trusted with 5 kilos at a time, product worth hundreds of thousands on the streets. He wasn't meant to be a small player. He wanted more. He wanted to build his own chain, a rival empire inside the empire. But ambition is a dangerous fuel, it burns faster than it builds. When police pressure mounted, Johnson cracked. Instead of silence, he spoke. Instead of loyalty, he betrayed. He pointed fingers at those closest to him, even his own relatives. He painted himself as the victim, desperate to convince detectives that he was no more than a pawn, dragged in by others. But lies are fragile things, and the evidence told a very different story. Financial records, phone data, and encrypted messages all pointed directly back to Johnson. CCTV placed him at key handovers. Bank accounts showed movements that no ordinary job could explain. His empire wasn't a fabrication, it was fact. And every attempt to shift blame only tightened the spotlight on him. In trying to escape the noose, Johnson had tied it tighter. His betrayal didn't just expose him, it exposed the entire network. Because once detectives saw through his lies, they turned every detail against Jonathan Mann's empire. Journeys, handovers, encrypted chats, all began fitting into place, puzzle pieces clicking together. And this was the real turning point. Not the raids. Not the cash or the kilos. But the moment when betrayal revealed the hidden cracks. Johnson thought he was clever and thought he could deflect the weight of justice. Instead, he became the proof detectives needed to move in for the kill. Johnson thought he could save himself. Instead, he helped tighten the noose around them all. And detectives were about to make their move. The end came not with a single arrest, but with a carefully timed strike. After months of surveillance, phone data, and financial probes, detectives had built their case brick by brick. And in 2022, the walls finally closed in on Jonathan Mann's empire. In the early hours, teams of officers gathered in silence. Coventry. Atherton. Streets are still asleep. They had one chance, to strike fast, seize everything, and dismantle a network that had thrived on discipline and invisibility. Doors were smashed open. Voices shouted through hallways. Rooms torn apart in seconds. And inside those walls, the truth revealed itself. 21 kilos of cocaine, enough to flood communities across the Midlands. 5 kilos of ketamine. £450,000 in cash, hidden in wardrobes and suitcases. A collection of encrypted phones, some programmed to wipe themselves clean. And at the home of Luke Purcell, a modified handgun, altered to fire live rounds. The presence of that weapon changed everything. This was no longer just a drug case. It was a case of drugs and guns, an escalation that shook even seasoned investigators. The men who once moved like ghosts were now dragged into daylight. Luke and Alexander Purcell, their endless road trips exposed. Ryan Prescott, the courier who had carried hundreds of kilos under the radar, suddenly in handcuffs. Ian Lewis, whose luxury cars were now logged as exhibits. Thomas Johnson, the betrayer, undone by his own lies. And Jonathan Mann, the orchestrator who had kept his hands clean, finally bound by the web he thought would protect him. At Birmingham Crown Court, the empire was taken apart piece by piece. Detectives presented hotel records, surveillance notes, convoy sightings, and encrypted chat logs. Every message, every journey, every car purchase was laid bare. What once looked like silence became a deafening chorus of evidence. The judge delivered a damning verdict, describing them as calculated, professional criminals, men who operated with precision, who built wealth on the suffering of others, and who believed discipline would shield them from justice. But justice had caught up. For all the millions trafficked, for all the effort to appear invisible, their downfall wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a cinematic shootout or a spectacular chase. It was methodical. A quiet unraveling. A network dismantled one seizure, one hotel receipt, and one encrypted message at a time. And yet, as the sentences were handed down, one question lingered: if an operation this disciplined could collapse so completely, how many more empires are out there right now, operating in silence, waiting to fall? The courtroom became the final stage for Jonathan Mann's empire. Years of careful planning, silent trips, and encrypted orders were reduced to hard drives, bundles of cash, and exhibits tagged with evidence numbers. Jonathan Mann, the man who never touched the drugs but controlled the entire system, was sentenced to 13 years and 4 months in prison. Thomas Johnson, who tried to save himself by betraying his own circle, was handed 16 years, the longest of them all. Luke Purcell, whose 160 journeys formed the backbone of the network, received 13 years and 2 months. His younger brother, Alexander, was sentenced to 9 years for his supporting role. Ryan Prescott, the trusted solo courier who moved more than 100 kilos on his own, was given 8 years. And Ian Lewis, the money man who laundered the gang's profits into cars and luxury, was handed just 3 years, reflecting his limited but essential part. After the verdict, West Midlands Police issued a statement: "These men built an empire on addiction and illusion, but no matter how well they planned, we were there, watching, recording, waiting." The empire had promised riches. Fast cars, tailored jackets, hotel rooms, and confidence that fooled even those closest to them. But it dissolved not with violence, not with street battles or revenge killings, but with surveillance, patient, methodical, and relentless. Every trip logged. Every encrypted chat is preserved. Every illusion stripped away. Their story is a reminder that discipline and silence are not immunity. No matter how carefully built, every empire leaves traces. And in this case, those traces led straight to the dock. The watches now sit in evidence lockers. The car was impounded. The phones are tagged and powerless. And the men who once moved like shadows now spend their days under fluorescent prison lights. For all their precision, the empire ended in routine. A quiet dismantling of a loud illusion. Jonathan Mann stayed above the mess. He never touched the drugs. Never dirtied his hands with the product. His empire was run at a distance, detached, disciplined, hidden. But when the walls came down, that distance didn't save him. It buried him. The illusion of power, control, and respect dissolved in an instant. And now, he faces the question every empire builder must eventually ask: was it worth the years lost? If you thought the Coventry Empire was calculated, wait until you see what's next. International cartels are flooding Britain with uncut cocaine. Smuggling operations are so vast, they make regional networks look like small businesses. And the story behind how detectives are racing to stem a tide that never seems to stop. Don't miss what comes next. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us as we uncover the hidden empires shaping crime in Britain today.